Welcome to Puppies, Pandemics, and Public Health. I am Dr. Johnny Lieberman. If you've ever wondered how your everyday choices, including what you eat, what you buy, what you wear, and the medicines you take, impact your health, the health of your family, animals, and the planet, you are in the right place. Let's get to it. Hello, it's Dr. Johnny Lieberman. We are here today with Daria Bednarczyk, who is a graduate of Vermont Law and Graduate School. While there, she earned her Juris Doctor degree with a concentration in animal law. In addition, Daria holds a bachelor's degree in marine science, a Master of Business Administration, MBA, and a Master of Environmental Law and Policy. Daria is passionate about using her extensive educational background to promote better treatment and welfare for all animals. With that, Daria, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Absolutely. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Of course. I'd like to start off with what would be your one thing, if you could pick one, one topic that you want to absolutely make sure that we discuss and get across to our viewing audience. What would be the most important message you want to share?
So for the purposes of today's meeting, what I really wanted to talk about is CAFOs, and those are concentrated animal feeding operations. And even though we may not live near a farm, they do impact us on a human health level, animal welfare level, as well as an environmental level. So kind of teaching the audience about the impacts of industrial animal agriculture.
That's a great place to start. And I think we could even springboard off from there. I think many are largely unaware of the extremely toxic nature and the significant consequences of our everyday farm animal production system that we use here, and similar systems are used elsewhere around the world, but how it's considered normal. And the system is only growing in terms of the number of animals used, the number of animals raised, and the amount of food produced for the demand, the amount of food that's demanded and consumed. So, yeah, Daria, what is a CAFO? And what is this system of farm animal production that is the dominant system in the U.S.?
Yes, absolutely. So what is a CAFO? CAFO stands for Concentrated Animal Feeding Operation, and to put this into perspective, think of massive barns that house thousands of cows, pigs, or chickens in confined spaces. These operations are designed to maximize profits and production, but at the expense, we have to think about where all the waste from all those animals goes to. And it has to go somewhere. And most often it ends up in our water, our air, and on land. And that is a huge human health risk. And I think it's something that needs to be discussed because, interestingly, this morning I was reading the news, and it was this really tragic story that took place in Colorado where 6 dairy workers, including a 17-year-old high school student, were found dead at a large dairy. And it is stated by experts that they likely inhaled hydrogen sulfide gas, which is a toxic byproduct of decomposing manure. And just inhaling a few breaths of that in a confined space can be fatal, and it was. And so this is a heartbreaking reminder that CAFOs don't just harm the animals or the environment, but they create deadly conditions for the people working inside them and for the communities surrounding them.
Wow. Could you repeat that again? 6 deaths?
6 deaths on one farm. And from what I can recall from the news article that I read, it's like the largest death that occurred from inhaling hydrogen sulfide that we have heard of yet.
Wow. And that's hydrogen sulfide. Is that a gas released from the manure of the farm animals?
Yeah, it's a byproduct of that.
Wow. So, yeah, so we could just, as unsexy of a topic as it is, we can talk about waste for a little bit, because until I learned about this relatively recently, the concept of having 10,000 animals in a very tightly confined space, it never dawned on me. What do we do with all that waste, right? For humans, if you have humans living in a big city, for example, we have complex waste management systems in place to handle the waste. The waste is treated in a way that makes it less noxious and less able to transmit diseases and cause problems. And then it's filtered away somewhere to decompose, hopefully safely. So you could take a city of Denver, we're talking about Colorado, that's got somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 million people. And most cities, we never hear of waste management issues. I don't want to say never, they happen, but it's very uncommon. What is the waste management system like on a factory farm, for example, that I believe, and give us a number maybe if you have one, but they produce, I think, millions of pounds of waste a year, millions of pounds. So how is that managed on a farm?
That's a great question. And to be frank, it's not managed the same way that we manage human waste. And so for today, I did bring a landmark case that took place in Washington State. It's called Care versus Cow Palace. And I think it would be a great example to show us how our current laws are falling short in protecting us
That would be,
from
yep.
the waste.
Now that would be great
So,
if I were, yep, there was a contamination case, right? And
yeah.
humans were being harmed as a result of it. So yeah, if you want to summarize that, that was eye-opening to me hearing about it. I think it'll be eye-opening to the public. I think in 2025, many people don't think that our water can get contaminated from a farm. I think you'll be surprised and perhaps informed to hear about some of the details of this case. So Daria, go.
All right. Well, I'm going to start off with some of the human health impacts before I jump into the facts
Okay.
of the case. So let's start with the human health side. And what that consists of is one of the largest problems is nitrate contamination from manure. And when CAFOs apply more manure than our land can absorb, then nitrate likely seeps into groundwater. And in Washington's Yakima Valley, private wells were found with nitrate levels that were well above the EPA's safe drinking limit, which is 10 milligrams per liter. And for babies in particular, this can cause what is known as blue baby syndrome. And this prevents blood from carrying enough oxygen and, if untreated, can result in death. And for adults, high nitrates are linked to cancer, thyroid problems, and various reproductive issues. And alongside of that, we also have air pollution with gases like ammonia and, like mentioned earlier, hydrogen sulfide, which drift from what are called manure lagoons and spray fields. And they often cause headaches, asthma, various respiratory problems. And this isn't just a theory. As we stated earlier, the Colorado tragedy shows how deadly hydrogen sulfide can be. And it's a reminder that the risks of workers and nearby residents, face these issues every single day. And living near a CAFO is likely very stressful. Families deal with constant odors, flies, and the anxiety of knowing that their water is more than likely being contaminated by the nearby farms. So to jump into the Cow Palace case, this was a case that took place in 2015.
Hey, Daria, I'm going to interrupt you here if
Of
I
course.
could. There's
Yeah.
a couple of points you hit on that I want to just make sure that our viewers understand. I don't think many in the public, including myself until recently, have an idea of what a manure lagoon is.
Yes.
Would you just like to share the unbelievable, disgusting nature of what a manure lagoon is? And this is a waste management system, if it can be called that, that's going on farms all over the country. Share what a manure lagoon is for the public.
Of course. So a manure
It's not a
lagoon.
bad sounding name, right? Manure lagoon doesn't
No,
sound.
but it's sadly exactly what it sounds like. It is a massive pit that is used to store the waste, the manure from a farm on the property typically. But the problem is how those lagoons are managed. And sometimes they can be lined, or in the case that we'll be talking about, unlined lagoons. And those cause massive problems because it's just these huge pits filled with noxious waste, and people suffer from it.
Like these are hundreds of thousands of gallons of untreated
Untreated, correct?
manure. Okay.
Yeah.
They turn purple pink color. So they turn this purple pink, which again, it doesn't look that bad if you don't know what it is. It turns that color from the bacteria and what they produce. I'm going to post some pictures on the channel for those who are watching this on YouTube, so you get an idea of what these manure lagoons are. But yeah, thank you for that, for permitting my interruption. Please continue.
No, absolutely. I think it'd be great to show what one of those lagoons look like, because it is kind of wild once you see it. So back to Care versus Cow Palace, like I said, which took place in 2015 in Washington State. Cow Palace Dairy is located in Yakima Valley, and at the time it housed over 11,000 cows. And with these 11,000 cows, the manure had to go somewhere. So they stored the manure on that farm in what are called unlined lagoons. And because it's unlined, seepage and leakage can often occur. And they can also use that manure to spread on fields way beyond what crops could actually use as a way to fertilize crops. But when manure is sprayed onto fields and it is over applied, that's where problems really come into play. And so the result from having unlined lagoons and
So hold on,
spraying.
I'm going to interrupt you here again. I just want to paint
Yeah,
an image for the public. And if you haven't seen this, this is another thing you can look for. The concept of spraying manure in the air to fertilize a farm. I want you to think about what that's like. I mean, you wouldn't do that on your own yard if you had it, because the neighbors would throw a fit and it's just disgusting. But
gross.
it's literally spraying manure over large areas of open field in the air
Yeah,
and spewing the bacteria, the nitrates. It's in the air for everyone around to breathe and smell. So just again, and that's a normal practice, correct? Spraying
that is.
manure
Yeah.
in an effort to fertilize. That's another topic about how effective that is and how much needs to be applied. But I just wanted to, again, paint a little bit of that image. So we've got these giant multiple 1,000-gallon manure lagoons sitting there, and these farms are spewing into the air untreated manure. Continue.
Correct. Well, thank you. That is important to try to create some imagery here, because it is really unbelievable. But in this case, the dangerous nitrate levels affected the local aquifer, and this affected wells that families in the area relied on for their drinking water. And in this case, the plaintiffs, there was two plaintiffs, the Community Association for Restoration of the Environment, also called CARE, and the Center for Food Safety, or CFS. And they sued Cow Palace under RCRA, which is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. And in this case, the court found that Cow Palace's practices amounted to open dumping and created what is called an imminent and substantial endangerment to human health and the environment. And this was the first time that a court recognized that mismanaged manure could legally count as a solid waste under RCRA. And that's huge precedent, because it opened up a legal path for communities to fight back against CAFO pollutions. But that was the biggest issue here, was whether the manure management practices constituted disposal of solid waste. And that's how the community kind of got around, suing Cow Palace, because otherwise there aren't really strict regulations that oversee manure management practices. Because Cow Palace's practices were considered mismanagement, because what they were doing was they were over applying the manure to their crops, and even on bare ground. So places that didn't have any crops to fertilize, they just kept spraying the manure onto them, and there was nothing to absorb it or to fertilize, and therefore it just leached further into the ground, and that's how it got into the waterways and affected the drinking water. And it made water not safe, and so people in the area had to spend money on bottled water. They had to avoid, fishing, swimming, or anything in the local area. And I believe it affected residents as far as in a 3-mile radius around the CAFO. So if you think about how many people that actually affected, it's pretty staggering.
Yep. Thank you. Go ahead. Continue.
Yeah. So I can cover some facts here. Cow Palace's lagoons, it is stated that their lagoons leaked over 8,300 gallons of manure daily. If you want to think about that for a minute.
Yeah, think about that. Over 8,300 gallons of manure leaking daily. Wow.
Daily. And as I stated earlier, the manure was applied to fields without regard for crops' actual fertilizer needs. And because the manure occurred on bare soil with no crops, it means that the nutrients from the manure leached into groundwater rather than being used and absorbed. And upon doing groundwater testing, there were nitrates above the 10 milligrams per liter that is allowed by the EPA. And so that is what's considered the maximum contaminant level. And as I stated again or earlier, this reached residents as far as the 3-mile radius around there. And to, drive it in even harder, dairy pharmaceuticals were also detected in the groundwater, confirming that the source came from the farm.
Wow. And so the holding was the dairy farm was liable and
Correct.
for their practices, and a change needed to be made, right? I believe this case settled and there were financial implications for the dairy that had to make corrections to their practice. There was financial compensation, I recall, and they had to do stuff like providing bottled water to the people. Tell if you maybe want to summarize what happened as a result to rectify it.
So to rectify it, just as you had stated, the defendants did have to supply residents with bottled drinking water and try to remedy the issues that their farms had caused and prevent any type of leaching. But from what I have learned is there are still issues going on to this day. It's not fully, fixed or corrected. And so people are continuing to suffer. And this is just one farm. This is happening everywhere. And we're only talking about manure right now. We're not talking about all the other different ways that CAFOs harm the environment and the people. And, we're not even getting into animal welfare issues that occur on these farms. So this case is pretty huge in helping people fight back against large ag, because right now the laws that we have are kind of lagging behind and aren't protecting the humans, the animals, or the environment in the way that they need to be.
I'm glad you brought that up. That was going to be my next question so this is 2015, so 10 years ago, one farm, and the practices that are going on there, they're going on all over the country.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but they're going to continue to happen unless somebody brings up a case against one of them, correct? Or are the farms changing on their own because they saw this case and they're like, I don't want to get sued next. So I'm going to line my wells and I'm going to readdress my waste management practices. What's going on with the other CAFOs across the country? Are they changing?
I hate to say that, in my opinion, they aren't. Because of the laws kind of having like loopholes and gray areas, these CAFOs are allowed to continue these common practices without suffering any type of repercussions. And this could be such a long conversation if we really got into all of the various ways that CAFOs aren't being fully regulated. We could talk about that for such a long time, but sadly, we're going to have to look to lawsuits such as this one to help protect people, because like you said, there's so many CAFOs in the US and they're not being managed properly. And so we're going to continue to see these issues unless something changes. So I think that to make a difference as consumers, it's in the choices we make, supporting farms that support animal welfare, and pushing for stronger environmental and public health policies.
Yeah, you have lawsuits as one way to address the problem. Unfortunately, as we saw, that's a one case by case basis. If it does not get expanded, if the industry doesn't change their practice, there's numerous gaps in the law, and if they were enforced, or if those gaps were removed, that would be another way to get past the problem. There's numerous hurdles in place, as I'm sure you're aware of, but I don't think the public is. But we have a system designed to protect the public from this. However, the steps for getting there are complex and difficult. And if the public doesn't know about these harms, they can't advocate for change if they don't even know about it. And that's a big problem. I never gave a second thought to my drinking water being contaminated for decades. And you bringing this up, there's people who it affects them every single day of their life now, having to worry about if their water was clean. And that's something I want to share. To how close do you live to a farm? If you're listening now, do you live near a farm? Do you even know if you do? A lot of times these facilities are way back off the road and they're nondescript looking windowless buildings. You might not even know what's there unless you realize the smell. How close do you live? Is your drinking water contaminated? Do you know if it's contaminated? Those are all great questions you should be asking, especially if you smell manure and you think you might live near a farm. The levels in the drinking water for much of the public may be above these safe thresholds, and nitrates that are in there, potentially bacteria as well. That wasn't brought up, I don't think, with this case. But if manure is leaking into the water supply, there are many things which can be contaminating. Nitrates is one of them, which has documented adverse health consequences affecting you now if it's in your drinking water. So I'm really glad you brought up that case. It brings a real world problem affecting people now, as well as the hydrogen sulfide affecting young workers now. It's tragic. It's tragic.
It really is. And, if we had more time to discuss this, we could talk about all of the people who have died at the hands of these manure lagoons. And usually if one person, falls in or goes in, somebody's going to go in and try to save them. And that's how we end up with these multiple deaths surrounding these manure lagoons. And they should be addressed. They need to be addressed because otherwise we will continue to suffer. And like you said, some people may not even know that this is occurring. And so raising awareness around this is really critical.
No, thank you. Thank you for bringing all that up. So that's a great topic. Everything here is factual to our listeners. If you don't believe it, look it up on your own. The opinions we're sharing may be our own, but they're based on solid facts. And if the concept of a manure lagoon is new to you, do a little research, look it up. It's kind of horrifying and disgusting. And same thing for manure disposal, as we brought up in this case. It's literally the spraying of manure in the air and much more than the ground can handle. And that has to go somewhere. And it's going into our soil. It's going into our drinking water. It's really quite disgusting. So you brought up the waste management problem as a direct impact on people now as a result of these CAFOs. Is there some other adverse event that the public is suffering that may not even know about it as a result of this factory farming industry?
Oh, yeah. Well, if we talked about poultry CAFOs, we could talk about the ammonia in the air that comes from those types of CAFOs and the dangerous levels of ammonia around those farms and how those cause problems in humans, the environment, and the animals as well. Really, every aspect of CAFOs has some danger attached to it. And one great example, if people ever want to look into, is what happens to CAFOs during natural disasters. Let's look at North Carolina as an example. Unfortunately, we get a lot of hurricanes in North Carolina, and with CAFOs being located on floodplains, what do you do with the animals? What happens with those animals? What happens to the waste and everything when the water comes through? How do we handle that? And I know with several hurricanes in the past, states have had to bring in incinerators from out of state, and they're burning everything that was dredged up and released from the CAFO 24 hours a day. And then you have to think about all of the chemicals and particles that are burning into the atmosphere in trying to clean up the mess that the hurricane caused because we don't have proper practices put in place on how to deal with CAFOs during a big natural event like a hurricane.
Wow. And that would be something that might require a new law, correct? Would we need a new law to kind of address that?
Disaster management plans of some sort. And even if there are some in certain states or localities, they need to be stronger and more unified to ensure that all CAFOs are being evacuated properly. But with the mass number of animals being housed at these farms, if you want to call them farms, I don't see a good way of evacuating them before a big natural disaster. I don't
No,
know who would be able to support that.
no, agreed. It's one of many arguments, I think, for dismantling this system. That's really the answer. We've only touched on a couple of the significant adverse consequences to the system, which are really, really difficult to get away from, right? The manure
Absolutely.
problem we talked about, you can't get around there producing hundreds of thousands of pounds of manure a year. That's just a fact of the farm if you're going to house 10 or 20,000 animals in a confined space. That's the reality of it. So two broad approaches, though there's more than one, is one, you can invest time and money into trying to mitigate the risks of the current system, which doesn't address other non-waste related problems, which we haven't even touched on, or the system is unacceptable. It's bad. It's horrible for the animals. It's bad for the public. It's toxic for the environment. Maybe we should be investing in a different system of farming. Uh,
Absolutely.
there's two broad ways of going about it. As I said, you can work on changing the current system and mitigating it, or you could work on abandoning it and moving away to a system that's better for all involved.
The, idyllic American family farm, that's sadly a thing of the past now. That doesn't really exist anymore. It's not enough to support our demand for meat. And, we need to address that in several ways and forms. But you're right, this is not the way to go. And we need to find new ways to address these issues.
Yeah, those are all great points. And that's something I want. And demand reduction is another way, right? Part of the reason the CAFO rose was because of the demand for meat. And companies saw they could make a profit by mechanizing into an assembly line or disassembly line, as it's been called, factory model of turning animals into food product more quickly and more cheaply to support an increasing demand. And that's been done over the years, perhaps not with a view of these now unintended consequences, but they're catching up with us and they're severe. And it's my opinion that trying to mitigate the system we have and tweak it and come up with plans is not in the best interest of anybody involved. It's my
Absolutely.
opinion there needs to be a reallocation, a diversion of funding to invest in more humane farming models that are safer for the public and less destructive to the environment. And we know how to do it. It's a question of, is there the public will to do it? Right now, there's not. And hopefully sharing some knowledge about how toxic the current system is and how there are different ways to go about doing it. This will give you something to think about and talk with others and maybe even talk to your lawmaker about other ways to solve this problem that's in the best interest of your family, your friends, your neighbors, and the constituents of the lawmaker.
Yeah, we can't allow this to continue to be the normal cost of business and facing these catastrophic harms to humans, animals, and the environment. This can no longer be sustainable.
It's already not, and there's real world consequences. The number of humans who we can document have suffered directly, like this group on the Colorado farm, the number is small. And so that can easily get lost and swept under the rug. However, as I've learned from practicing medicine over the years, outcomes that are devastating, that affect a small number, if it affects you, it's real. It's
Absolutely.
devastating if you lose a family member early than expected for cancer or an influenza infection that came from a pig. It's tragic. It's at this point, it's small series of events and adverse events, but they're growing. They're going to continue to grow. And if it affects you or your family, it's devastating. And it doesn't have to be that way.
I agree.
Daria, we're coming up to the end here. Are there any other final points you'd like to make before we close?
I want to thank you for bringing me on. I think this is such an important podcast to shed light on things that are happening around us that maybe some of us haven't been made aware of. And so to bring it to our attention, I think, is super important and really great. I'm very happy to be here with you to discuss this. And I guess what I'd like to end with is, awareness is the first step. And as listeners, what we eat and support can help drive change. So we just need to be more mindful and push for better legislation and better regulation of these farms.
Absolutely. Thank you. Next time you go into a grocery store and buying food, look into it. Where's that food coming from? If you're buying animal product, if you're buying chicken breast or ground beef, where's it coming from? Are you contributing to this problem? The one or two really true organic, sustainable farms in the state where you're buying your product from. They're really, really hard to find in 2025, but they're out there. But think about where it's coming from. Look up the company and try and cut through some of the propaganda that's out there. All right. You might see a picture of a smiling cow on the dairy product or a nice red barn that conveys this nice image in your head that it's coming from that. Probably not the case. So look into it. You have, as Daria said, I want to emphasize, you have a choice. Individual choices you make on the products you buy and how you spend your money can either support toxic industries or not. So think about that, do your own research, and stay informed to help make smarter decisions for you and your family. Daria, thanks so much for being a guest. I appreciate your time, your opinions, your insight. Thanks for sharing all that with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. These conversations aren't always easy, but they're important and worth having. Take what resonates, ask questions, and keep learning. Find us on Doctor Podcast Network. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice nor legal advice, and it cannot replace professional consultation with your doctor, lawyer, or other licensed expert. Always seek guidance that's specific to your situation.